morning to you all. My name's Steve Evans, and I work for the BBC, and I always look forward to this event because at the end of it all, I go away energized and thinking in ways I didn't think before, so it's a delight to be here. It's my job, my role, to interview Mark and get him to sort of outline the way he sees things going and the way he sees the world going, indeed. He, I suppose, is the chairman of the conference, if that's the grand title you want to give him, but he's certainly the man behind the shebang, which is the less grand title. What he is as well, I think, is he's a guy who thinks very clearly and very sharply about things. And what you sometimes find if you read the newsletters is you read the FT, let's say, or the Journal a couple of months later, and you think, yeah, I've heard that before somewhere. And then you realize you heard it in the newsletter, and this man's the man behind what you heard earlier. So he's well worth listening to. And what I want him to talk about, really, is what he sees as being the themes of the year, the important things of the year and the conference, and what he thinks we should be looking at, and how we might think about getting what is clearly wrong with various things right. So let's start with that first, Mark. What do you think is broken, seriously broken beyond repair, and what do you think has just got a bit of a glitch that time might heal and a bit of tinkering?
Right. We have just been through an awakening process, I think, Steve, and part of that process has to do with what you're referring to as the repairable part. Another part is that the world doesn't work the way that we thought it worked. No, is that true for just the last 4 or 8 years, or is that true in a deeper way? So I think we have two classes of damage. The easy repair is done by better leadership. And whether it's at the federal level or whether it's at the company level, board of directors level, we have been in a situation that didn't believe in leadership, essentially. Didn't believe in transparency, didn't believe necessarily in honesty, intellectual honesty, doing things knowingly that was going to cause damage in the long run. That's not true leadership. That's greed.
What do you mean didn't believe in leadership? A system that didn't believe in leadership?
I think
that's not
that
obvious to
we have been worshiping the shrine of self-dealing. If you could categorize the last 8 years, top-down in the American government, it's how do I get the money to my guys?
That's it.
The overall legacy of the Bush administration will be one of transferring money. And I'm now at the point where I even see the Iraq War simply as a way of having a staging area that's so chaotic that when you drop $10 billion in cash on a Friday night, no one notices. True. So, you loot the entire museum in Baghdad, So I don't know where the money went. I don't know who's got the money. But we know it's about $1 trillion. Of that, some got used, not all. We don't even know how much. We don't even know how much. So that kind of anti-leadership, that approach to things where I'll get mine and the heck with you, has got to stop. And I think it has stopped on the federal level, at least at the very top. But this has also been true in companies.
Well, let's stay with the politics first of all. Does that mean it was simply a failure? I'm not accepting what you say about Bush, by the way, but let's assume I do. Does that mean it was simply a failure of morality, or was there something much more fundamental going on? And was it really confined to Bush? Was Clinton not part of this?
So you say, is there something more fundamental than morality?
Was it just we got a bad guy in and something quite cynical happened, or was there something more systemic, more structural going on?
I'd like to propose that there's nothing more fundamental than morality.
Sure.
So that is fundamental. And if the people under a leader feel that there's no moral compass, or the compass is saying, get yours, well, you can. Don't regulate, just take care of money. Then that's what will happen. Now, the good news is that's the easy part to repair. That's the quick repair. You put in somebody who doesn't believe in those things, and immediately you get a cabinet of people who are qualified, who believe in regulation, who are skilled enough to do it, who want to do it, who understand their field. It's a revolution, and it takes 20 minutes. So that part is easy to repair. The tougher part are systems which are built wrong, right? So let's look at shorts and at oil pricing. We now know what happened to oil pricing, and we're starting to learn who did it. And it looks, we have one company under investigation for having a trading floor. This is the largest oil handler in the U.S. Trading floor is completely private. The only point of this floor is to affect price. That's interesting. I didn't know that. So here you are, an oil provider, and your job, you're buying stock options to drive up the price. Oh, well, how much? Well, 11% of all the trades on the floor, one company, in one day.
But there's nothing new. This is a revelation, everybody. There's nothing new about dishonesty.
No, it's been
It
around
wasn't
forever.
invented.
But what is new is if I told you back when things were running up from $80 to $147, which we all had that conversation, that everything above 80 was fluff, and that in fact maybe it wasn't even Wall Street, but it was the oil providers driving up their own prices, you would have balked. And now we know, not only was Wall Street, all that money above $80, but it was at least largely providers. There's some great story for you or someone else to do there, finding out, taking a look at the big providers and saying, what was your part? Did you pay these other guys, or were you involved?
If capitalism depends on greed, which it does, I think.
Gordon Gekko said, greed is good.
Yeah. And capitalism is the only system that has really worked in all its difficulties and blips and whatever. It is still the best system on offer.
Yes.
How do we get a system that marries greed or extreme self-interest with one which is honest and which continues to work?
So there are two problems. One is, do you have the right regulations? And the other is, do you have the right leaders?
Without over-regulating.
Yeah.
I
Well,
add.
so if you're willing to break the laws and no one's going to punish you, there's no point in having laws. So we have a situation where arbitrage sounds like a good thing to do if you're an oil company, but price manipulation is strictly illegal. Well, we had price manipulation, in my humble opinion. So we already have laws about that. The problem is we didn't have anybody in the enforcement seats to take care of it. So you have to have both. You have to have leadership, and you have to have the right regs. So we have a situation still tonight, where shorting is unrestricted. Now, we learned that lesson a long time ago when we put this thing called the uptick rule in place. Money can buy anything in this country. So money bought the Glass-Steagall Act being taken away, all those lessons we learned about commercial banking in the 1929, and also bought getting the uptick rule taken away. So one of our deep problems that I don't know how to fix is when the banking lobby spends $1 billion to get rid of what we learned from the Depression, who's there to say, I'm sorry, don't do that? And that's missing in our system. You can call it capitalism, but I think there's another word for this. When our own representatives owe more financially to the lobby system, to the K Street guys, than to the people who are citizens. That's a big problem, and we don't know how to solve that problem right now.
Is it partly a problem of, sounds very old-fashioned this, is it partly a problem of morality, which
Sure.
something went out the window, and we have a scandal in England at the moment, in Britain at the moment, where members of Parliament abuse the expenses system. They were completely within the rules, and they seem a bit aghast now that the public, the taxpayer, says, no, you can't claim from the taxpayer, from me, to maintain the moat in your house. I'm not making this up, by the way.
Yeah.
In other words, a system seems to have arisen in people's minds that if I can get away with it and the rules don't forbid it, then it's fine. How do you get back to a system where people say, well, the rules may allow it, but it ain't fine, really, you know?
I think that's leadership. I would agree with what you said earlier. You can't regulate everything. At some point, you need someone who's the lead dog to stand up and say, this is just not how we do things. And I think Cameron stood up pretty quickly on that issue, faster than Gordon Brown did. That's a leadership issue. And so instead of trying to regulate every last detail in the world, you want people running your companies and running your countries who sell that, who offer leadership, not money. When we have an election, people offer money. Chicken in every pot, right? I'll cut your taxes. That's all you have to say, I'll cut your taxes. So even when they don't do it, they have to say it. And I wish they would say, I'll be your leader. I'll be honest. I'll tell you the truth about the situation. It sounds corny, doesn't it? But that's what we need. And we've now seen the cost of not having that. You know, it sounds all these corny things, but you just take the cost over the last years of not having that. Not in terms of just money, but in terms of American prestige overseas, in terms of our alliances. Make a list. It'll take us 10 years to unravel the damage and the levels of destruction that happen just because of not caring. Just benign neglect. So we need to have someone who say, I'm not that kind of leader. I believe in paying attention. I believe in honoring the law. I will obey the law. I'm part of the country. And I believe that every citizen should do the same thing. And that's contagious. It's contagious in a corporation. You know, the one way to change a corporate culture isn't to put up a sign by the door. You fire the old CEO, kick him out with no ceremony whatsoever because of some problem, and you say, here's the new guy, and guess what? And his personality is what the culture will be of that corporation.
I'm going to leave the script for one moment because something strikes me.
Yeah.
You're talking about leadership, political leadership, which brings up the name Obama. On the 100 days anniversary, Helen Thomas, the great White House correspondent, was asked, what'll be his downfall? And she said, he hasn't got a sense of humor. So, and I've thought and thought about that, and I think she's right. I don't quite know why, but I want to ask you, and this isn't on the script, and this is straight from left field or whatever, when Obama fails, as all politicians ultimately do, when he is reviled in, I don't know, 4 years' time or 7 years' time or whatever, what will it be that gets him?
So let me revise your question. He's being reviled on a daily basis on Fox News.
No, by the people. When the people say, oh, let's get rid of him, let's get somebody new in. Because it happens to all of them.
Well, my first call will be he won't be reviled. I don't think it's going to happen. But he will have an Achilles heel, which I think where you're going.
Yeah.
And that heel, I think, is it's Clintonian. It's wanting to please too many people instead of sticking to your guns on leadership issues. And it's already happening. So you see, they talk about his base be unhappy, but it's really people are unhappy. People want to feel as though if someone breaks the law, no matter who they are, they have to pay. Doesn't matter if you're the prince, the king, or the president. And the president, contrary to the last regime, isn't above the law. It isn't, as Condi Rice recently said, where if he does it, quoting Nixon really, if he does it, it is the law.
Yeah.
No, we're going back to King George, I think. You know, we don't have King George, and in fact, everybody, even the president, even the executive branch, has to obey what the legislature decides. That's our system. You know, so I think his problem is that problem, and it may get him into deep trouble, not just with his base, but with his performance. He may lose his way because he's so busy compromising, trying to get a three-point agenda that he's loved by no one instead of everyone, and doesn't get what he really wants.
Do you think he's got a sense of humor?
I do. I think he has a great sense. Very dry sense of humor.
Can he laugh at himself, really?
Yeah, I think he can. Okay. But inside of that, he's always known he was going to be president. He knew when he was 14 years old. So there's a very serious guy inside of the wrapper.
Back to business.
Yeah.
Interesting little digression.
Yeah.
You make much of what you call big rocks and shoals. Tell me what they mean, and tell me why I should be looking out for them in the next 12 months.
Okay, so I think our group knows the basic prediction here, which is we've got some commodities prices coming up. We've got a near-term deflationary risk. We have a longer-term inflationary risk. I'll just add, this group's in the know, which is kind of interesting. So they saw this coming March of 2007, and it was because of global liquidity. It was too much money floating around. That problem's still there. Matter of fact, guess what? Multiply it by some very large number now. Sure. So the risk of inflation, if not hyperinflation, is much higher now than it was when that started our problems.
How so? Given that prices are currently falling in lots of places.
Right. Well, that's a local temporary problem. But the big problem is we're flooding the markets around the world with too much money.
That money in, yeah.
Everybody's doing it. Even the reluctant Germans are doing it a little bit. So make a list of all the countries, including China, that are putting trillions of dollars of new money into the system, trying to avoid deflation. And no one's ever successfully timed this. So this quantitative easing bit is an experiment, and it'll be at our expense. And I'm very worried. And now I think we're now starting to see the first signs of this. We're very worried that inflation will follow, and it will be hard to stop. A lot of central bankers say, I'd rather have inflation, but what they mean is 2.1%. They don't want to have 30%.
Zimbabwean.
Yeah, they don't want to have exact 10,000%.
No.
So if you look right now at commodities, part of this is being driven by China's forward purchasing as they stimulate their own country. But even so, I think it's a larger trend. And we have copper going up, we got wheat going up, we got steel going up. All these things are starting to rise now. Very similar to the last time around. So and what we're saying is the technology in all this, in the U.S. and around the world, really is going to be a leader, not just in equities markets, but in business operations going forward.
Go on, explain.
But going back to our honesty story, the businesses which are global facing have a higher revenue exposure, and those which are engineering based are by nature truthful. How do you like that? You like that? So things which are close to actually building the bridge, right? Instead of telling you about the bridge.
Because bridges fall down if you're not truthful,
Yeah.
is the gist of it.
Either the truck goes over the bridge or it doesn't.
Sure, okay.
So
Engineers don't lie.
yeah. So that kind of project is going to lead the way out. Now, and that's not bridges because that's too close to construction. If in a fake way through the stimulus plan here, yes. But,
Sure.
but in the real sense, it's going to be the bridge builders of today, and those are all technology companies. And those which have 50% plus facing international markets will be the real leaders, I think. And we've seen that now. We had HP yesterday, which we'll talk about later today with Mark Hurd, but basically we've seen it. So the question is, are there rocks and shoals? And there are some things that could happen that people are just not even thinking about, you know. And I think one, if we lost all of the car companies in the U.S.,
Which you may do, but go on.
could do. I mean, it's not,
Yeah.
if I said that 3 years ago, we'd both be saying that's crazy,
Sure.
right? That's possible. And it's a good reason not to do it. If that happened, I don't think we could afford it. I think that the value chain, the supply chain destruction would be international and irreplaceable. It just wouldn't work. So that's a disaster to me.
But economics, gravity is gravity. The laws of economics are the laws of economics. And if car companies make cars that people don't want to buy,
Yeah, exactly.
you can't really finesse that.
Right. Well, Toyota's down 40%. I mean, everybody's down right
Yeah.
now. But going back to our friend Obama, the one thing that he's done that really showed me he did have some backbone is he kicked ass with General Motors.
Well, except he didn't let them go bankrupt.
No. So let's be very specific.
He didn't kick ass with General Motors.
He did. He
whacked
personally
in
fired the
taxpayers'
CEO.
money.
Personally fired the CEO. He fired half the board. They tried to replace the board, those guys, with their buddies, and he stepped in and again and said, no, you're not going to put your buddies here. You're going to hire Spencer Stewart, and we'll watch you do it. And you're not going to take 2 years doing it. It's going to take 6 months. So they've got a very tight leash, and they may still.
Sorry, let me stop you there.
They may still go bankrupt.
There's another way of reading that, and that is that actually, why bail out a car company? Car companies work in the market. They work to the rules of the market. They failed. They didn't see changes in taste. They didn't see changes in taste to do with emission standards, just taste in the way that cars
So
look.
I agree with every statement.
Let them fail.
Yeah, I agree with every statement you're making, even letting them go bankrupt.
Anyway.
But here's something which people don't talk about in economics. In the theory of NAFTA and free world trade, we should do what you're saying. If you were a smart, we have Ty Carlson, if you were a smart systems architect, and I gave you this problem, let's say that the lowest cost goods, provider of goods and services gets to win every category, in each category. That's the theory of free markets. Let's run this thing, and by the way, I have a country which is the lowest cost provider of goods and services, of all goods and services. What's going to happen in 10 years? That one country will make every good and every service. Oops. Welcome to China. So people haven't thought this through. They love the theory, the philosophy of free trade, but they haven't thought through, guess what? There are other people playing this game. We're playing with different rules than you're playing with. They may not pay their people at all. or they may not have the same environmental restrictions, or they may not have the same labor conditions, or there are a whole panoply of things that come to play here. And by the way, the top guys in the country may have made a policy decision to do exactly what they're doing. So it's not free trade. And it's a huge mistake for us to look at the global marketplace and even use terms like free trade, because there is no free trade. Every one of these players is jigging the game somehow. The Japanese are buying their own currency back and forth on a daily basis almost. The Chinese are doing their own things. We'll talk about that here at FIRE.
And let's not even talk about agriculture with this.
Exactly.
You know, but yeah.
Okay. So what happened with GM, I think, was done properly. And the reason is they may still go bankrupt. They may still declare Chapter 11. Probably will. But we can't lose the car companies.
Why not?
That's the point I'm trying to make. A country, India, UK, a country needs steel. Now we lost steel once. You can't lose steel. You have to have steel. You sound
like the old Soviet Union. You sound like Britain in the 50s and 60s.
I don't care what I sound like. What I care about is,
Britain
am I right?
in the 60s used to say we have to have a car industry, you know, and we put shed loads of public money into a car industry that ultimately failed.
Yes.
It was complete money in the sand, money down the drain.
Yes.
You know, you're going the same way.
Well, with all respect, I disagree. So I think there's going to be a reconsideration by world leaders of what we're talking about right here, that having China make all our steel and China make all our cars isn't the answer. What are you going to make? You make BBC. But, you know, that's a pretty rarefied thing.
I make whoopee.
You go to China to talk to the guys who are making the steel. That's what you do. So, you know, we're in a situation where I think world leaders, whether you're in Germany, whether you're in France, the biggest country, not every country, maybe not Britain for every one of these things, but America, yeah, has to have steel. You know what? To make tanks, I'll be just blunt about this, you have to make the chips that go into the computers that go into the warfare machine. You can't have all those imported from make a list. So each country, to the degree that it needs defense, has to make its own steel, its own chips, and so forth. Each country has to be provided the security economically to know it's got some industries which are its own. It can't just turn into a service-driven story. And that's a problem that no one's adequately had a conversation about. And without talking about tariffs or lack of free trade, we won't use that term free trade anymore. But countries haven't had an adequate conversation in all this NAFTA stuff about whether or not, is there a minimum list for each country, for every country, of what we want to preserve?
But the way capitalism is supposed to work, and heck, in the last 8 years you've heard this message, is failure is punished. If failure isn't punished, people aren't sharp.
Mm-hmm. I don't disagree.
So how do you get around that if the taxpayer, Mr. Obama's taxpayers, are always prepared to go like this and say, here you have some money, boy?
No, I understand. Well, look at it this way. We went through a period of time, which isn't over, by the way. We always talk about Japan as being the poor boy. You know, their GDP numbers suck. Again, this last quarter, horrible numbers. Japan has a system which is called a mercantilist system. They would accept that term, I think. The government and the business people work together. LDP is right in there. And they have a policy that they set. They pick a segment and they take it over. And they do this segment by segment by segment. It was once televisions. It was once cars. It was once chips. They have now taken things that we invent, they take. I don't blame them. They're smart. They're smarter than we are. So our system allows freer competition than theirs. But the result is we're losing the battle. Now, what do? Just let it go on or have a conversation about it? I think you know this, but the only reason Intel exists today, our Starship company in technology, is because they went whining to the government to implement Super 301 against the Japanese for dumping chips. And Intel was a memory chip company, and the Japanese drove them out of the business, and they were about to drive them out of everything when they invented the microprocessor, and the 301 thing scared the Japanese people so badly they didn't go after that part of Intel. If they had, there'd be no Intel. So this, people don't even know what 301 is, but it's an anti-dumping provision which allowed us to put tariffs on any goods that were involved.
Sure.
None of this is free trade.
No. The clock's against us, and we could talk forever. But the point I want to make to you, the 20th century was the American century because you eschewed all that stuff. You said capitalism is the way forward. We don't want state help. We'll do it ourselves. And it was fabulous. And now suddenly you seem to be saying, oh, not sure about that, maybe the government's the way forward.
I'm actually not saying that. But what I am saying is the world is much more complicated than averages and simple terms will allow. We have to look at each player and say, oh, I see what you're doing. You have no free trade, totally managed. Okay, you're part of the world, and I see what you guys are doing, and I see what you guys are doing. Now, how does this work as a system? And we have to have an intelligent conversation like that, instead of having this kind of one-liner thing about free or capitalism or communism.
The clock is against us. Let's move through very quickly these big rocks and shells. Mexico and California, what's your point?
My point is California is now bankrupt. They just don't know it. Dead man walking. And they're voting today, I guess, today? Yeah. They don't know how to control a situation where expenditures have become infinite and revenues are finite. And the people who live there who have money refuse to match that budget requirement. So what happens if California can't sell another bond? By the way, they can't. And what happens if they go bankrupt? What does that do? That's the 8th largest economy in the world. So that's one question. Mexico, different question. They're our neighbors. We have them here with us today. We spend negative time in America thinking about anything except migration issues. We never think about the country. If I ask somebody, what's the peso down for the last 6 months, they wouldn't know the answer is 25% or 33%. It's a huge reduction, by the way. These guys are suffering.
Sure.
So what happens if you take all the alpha males, or many of the alpha males, out of a country and move them into your country? What does that do? That was Vicente Fox's campaign plank.
Sure.
So if that country, I don't mean that it would be a failed state, but we call it a narco state now. What does that mean? So a great issue, and by the way, NAFTA didn't work out, did it? All those maquiladora plants that are supposed to be operating, paid for by China or Japan, aren't being used. So there's an issue there that no one's staring at straight in the face. The real question is, not failed state, but if there's an economic disaster in the making down there, and we have some people to talk to us about that.
Sure.
What do we do? What does the world do if Mexico just stops working? Right? Big problem.
Obama's safety, something else to think about.
Yeah. I hate talking about it, but here's a guy who so far I think has done all the right things. You couldn't have repaired things faster. And I'll go back to Hank Paulson just to be fair about it. I think a lot of people don't like Hank. I think he did every possible thing he could have done. People don't realize there was an abyss. They do not appreciate what they weren't told. They were told just enough to scare them to pass the tarp. And that's exactly what should have been told.
The 30s really was a possibility.
Oh, worse than that. I think worse than that. These guys were looking at infinite liability, way beyond tens of times the global GDP, and with no obvious path. What do you do? So we don't give enough respect to Hank Paulson, and we don't give enough respect to Tim Geithner for every morning seeing that abyss and calmly going about fixing this problem. If something happened to our chief, the world economic system would be in peril, I think.
You have 2 minutes and 21 seconds to talk about the rebound. We've been very gloomy. Tell me how we're going to get
pick it up a little bit?
2 minutes and 14 seconds.
All right.
Go on.
Shouldn't take more than 2 minutes, I don't think. Well, I've already said it, really. I think we have a chance to do this right. We've got the right guy in charge here. We have the right team in charge, which is more important. I believe Tim Geithner is the right guy, despite the Beltway feeling these days. We've got technology ready to lead again. And, if you do a rewind to 2000, which is essentially what's happening right now, things were terrific. And if you look at the players who are ready to go, if you look at the big trends, 2 billion people getting ready to come out of poverty, come into being consumers. You've got people ready to serve them with services and goods. You have basically peace in the world with this kind of fake war on terror going on. And everything's ready to go. So on a very large scale, there's a lot of money to be made. There are a lot of new people to consume things and to be part of a new global commerce.
One thought. in a minute and 17 seconds. The essence of the global imbalance is that Chinese make things that people want to buy. Americans borrow money to buy them. Do Americans get that fact yet? Because it implies a big change in spending habits when we come out of this thing.
Well, again, I'd like to slightly revise. Everything you're saying is true, but
I can oversimplify, by the way, but go on.
If you're dealing, let's say you're dealing with a country which uses labor which is either free or so close to free, it's essentially zero. How do you compete? Should you compete? Why would you compete with them? If you're not going to compete with them, what do you do? And that question has never been addressed. You know, if I say I'm XYZ, I'm a new country, and I decide I've got a lot of slaves, and I'm just not going to pay them, and I'm going to compete with you to make anything, you're not going to win.
But that's the world in which we live.
Okay, so that conversation hasn't been held. We need to have that conversation. That's the real conversation before we talk about should Americans be aware of who's pricing what at Walmart. Should Walmart carry those things? If so, in what context?
It's a conversation which we should have, but we can't have now.
Right.
Mark Anderson, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Steve.